Welcome to the series of Blender tutorials. This tutorial is about the Properties window in Blender 2.59. This script has been contributed by Sneha Deorukkar and Bhanu Prakash and edited by Monisha Banerjee. After watching this tutorial, we shall learn what is the Properties window. What is the texture panel in the Properties window? What are the various settings in the texture panel of the Properties window? I assume that you know the basic elements of the Blender interface. If not, then please refer to our earlier tutorial, Basic Description of the Blender Interface. The Properties window is located on the right-hand side of our screen. We have already seen the first panels of the Properties window and their settings in the previous tutorial. Let's see the next panel in the Properties window. First, we must resize our Properties window for better viewing and understanding. Left-click the left edge of the Properties window. Hold and drag to the left. We can see the options in the Properties window more clearly now. To learn how to resize the Blender windows, see our tutorial, How to Change Window Types in Blender. Go to the top row of the Properties window. Left-click the checkered square icon at the top row of the Properties window. This is the Texture panel. Here, we can add a texture to the active material of the active object. Just below the texture icon, we can see the links displayed. Cube to white to text. This means that the active object is the cube. White is the cube's active material. Text is the white material's active texture. There are three types of textures: material textures, world textures, and brush textures. We shall see material textures in this tutorial. World textures and brush textures will be covered in later tutorials. This is the texture slot box. By default, one texture is enabled for the active material. It is highlighted in blue. Left-click the checkbox at the far right of the highlighted texture. Now, the texture is disabled. Left-click the checkbox again. It is enabled again. Next to the checkbox is a vertical scroll bar. Left-click and hold the vertical scroll. Drag your mouse downwards. Now, you can see all the texture slots available for the current material. Each slot is represented by a checkered square. Scroll back to the active texture. The up and down arrows are used to move the textures up and down in the texture slot box. Left-click the down arrow. Active texture moves to the second texture slot. Left-click the up arrow. The active texture moves back to the first slot. Below the up and down arrows is another black down arrow. Left-click the black down arrow. A menu appears. Left-click Copy Texture Slot Settings. Left-click the second texture slot in the box. It gets highlighted in blue. Left-click the black down arrow again. Left-click Paste Texture Slot Settings. A new texture has appeared in the second texture slot with the same settings as the first texture. Left-click the cross sign at the right of the texture name bar below the slot box. the second texture is removed. Its settings are gone as well. A new button with a plus sign has appeared. Left-click the new button. A new texture has appeared in the second texture slot. So, this is another way to add a new texture. Notice how the checkered square on the left of the second texture has changed to a different image. A preview window has appeared below. It shows the preview of the active texture. Let's rename this texture. Left-click the texture name bar below the slot box. Type bump on your keyboard and hit the Enter key. Left-click the checkered square to the left of the name bar. This is the texture menu. All textures used in the scene are listed here. Below the name bar is the type bar. By default, every new texture displays the clouds texture. Left-click Clouds. This is the type menu. Here, all types of textures supported by Blender are listed. Wood, voxel data, Voronoi, etc. To select any texture type, just left-click on it. For now, I am keeping the clouds texture. This is the texture preview window. There are 3 display options here. Texture. By default, this display is always selected. Left-click Material. This shows the preview of the texture over the material. Left-click Both. As the name suggests, both texture and material displays are visible side by side now. Left-click Show Alpha. Now, the texture has become transparent. This is used for materials like glass and water. For now, let's switch it off. Left-click Show Alpha again. Next setting is Influence. There are various options here that help the texture influence the material in 4 main areas: diffuse, shading, specular, and geometry. By default, color under diffuse is enabled. Left-click the checkbox to the left of the color bar. Color is now disabled. The texture color no longer influences the material diffuse color. Go to Geometry. Left-click the checkbox next to Normal. Now the normal of the texture influences the geometry of the material. You can see the result in the preview window. All over the preview sphere, the clouds are spread as small bumps. Blend controls how the texture blends with the material. By default, it is set as Mix. Left-click Mix. This menu lists all the texture blend types supported by Blender. Do you see this pink color bar under RGB to intensity? This is the default texture color. Right now, it is not influencing the material color because, remember, we disabled the color option under Influence. Left-click the pink color. A color menu appears. Here we can select any color for our texture. For now, let's leave it as pink because we are not using the texture color. Bump mapping determines how the normal of the texture affects the geometry of the material. Default is the current method of bump mapping. Left-click Default. This menu lists the different methods of bump mapping. Best quality, default, compatible, and original. Left-click Compatible. The bump influence is increased. Next setting is Clouds. Here are various options for the cloud's texture. Grayscale displays the textures in grayscale mode. Left-click Color. Now, the texture in the preview window is displayed in a mix of colors, but the color has no effect on the material. Noise determines the distortion of the cloud's texture. Soft noise is the default distortion. Left-click Hard. Now, the preview window shows hard black outlines in the cloud's texture. At the same time, the bumps on the material have become deeper. This is hard noise. Basis is the base or source of the noise in the cloud's texture. Left-click Blender Original. Here is the Noise Bases menu. This shows a list of all supported noise bases in Blender. Left-click Voronoi Crackle. You can see the change in the preview window. So, this is how noise bases affects the cloud's texture. Size, nabla, and depth control the characteristics of the noise in the cloud's texture. The last two icons at the top row of the Properties panel are Particles and Physics. These shall be covered in more advanced tutorials when we use particles and physics in our animation. Go to the 3D view. Right-click to select the lamp. Notice how the icons at the top row of the Properties panel have now changed. Some icons have been replaced while others have been removed. Right-click Camera in the 3D view. Again, you can see how the icons at the top row of the Properties panel have changed. This means that the tools in the Properties window are dynamic and depend on the type of active object in the 3D view. So this completes our tutorial on the Properties window. Now, you can go ahead and create a new file. Add a cloud's texture to the cube and play around with size, nabla, and depth of the cloud's noise. This tutorial is created by Project Oscar and supported by the National Mission on Education through ICT. More information on the same is available at the following links: oscar.iitb.ac.in and spoken-tutorial.org/nmeict-intro. The Spoken Tutorial project conducts workshops using spoken tutorials, also gives certificates to those who pass an online test. For more details,
please write us to contact@spoken-tutorial.org.
Thanks for joining us. And this is Monisha from IIT Bombay signing off.